for agreeing to this interview. For those of you who are watching, Isabel is a political journalist and broadcaster, previous political editor of the Sunday Times, and co-author of the biography of David Cameron, Call Me Dave. Firstly, Isabel, to start off, the Prime Minister last Sunday informed the country that the message of staying at home no longer was going to be applied, and a new rhetoric of staying alert was introduced. Is it confusing for people to understand, and is this message too early to introduce?
Well, I don't think that the message stay alert has been a particularly popular. People seem to be keen to be confused. I mean, actual sense of what the Prime Minister is asking people to do, I think, is as clear as daylight. It's just that the choice of words, stay alert, hasn't gone down very well. So there's no doubt that this has not been a communications triumph, but on the positive side for the Prime Minister, people do really understand, I think, what is meant there. And it is just really a sense that whilst things are easing, people have got to be on their guard, do not relax, because this virus still has a potential to spread.
In Scotland, it's just been announced that Nicola Sturgeon may introduce a stay alert or easing of the restrictions of lockdown on the 28th of May. Is this a problem for the Prime Minister that Wales and Scotland haven't followed the government's policy on this?
It's only been a bit awkward for Downing Street that the devolved administrations have chosen to do things their own way. I don't think anyone should be surprised about that. Nicola Sturgeon is an incredible political operator, and this has actually presented her with a real political opportunity. It's not one, of course, that anyone would want to have, but under the circumstances, she has got this opening to lead the way as she sees it, at any rate for her own country. And she will sense that whilst the government here in England continues to enjoy overwhelming support, quite a surprising level of support still, I think, for the government's handling of this crisis, nonetheless, there are serious flaws in much of what has been carried out. We know that there has been terrible failings in care homes, and that the testing and trace has been problematic. So there is a political opportunity here, and Nicola Sturgeon would be foolish not to take it. As for the Welsh administration, again, this is devolution coming home to roost, and it has been awkward for the Prime Minister, but I don't think overly problematic at this stage.
Because people that went abroad in February and March, they weren't tested when they came back. They were told to self-quarantine, but whether people actually did that, was that a problem?
I think this is a big issue, and they're still not doing it. I think it's extraordinary, personally, that this country continues to allow literally 100,000 people to come in every week from goodness knows where without any kind of challenge. I've read multiple accounts of the barriers that are put up to entering pretty much any other country you want to fly into at this moment. I think in Hong Kong, I read that if you fly there, I can't imagine why you would right now, but if you did, you're facing 8 hours at the airport there of checks to make sure that to every possible way of ascertaining whether you might be symptomatic or not. Whereas we're just allowing people, we're just basically waving them through. Now, the government is insistent that the numbers concerned are so small that it doesn't make sense to test people as they come in at the airport, to carry out temperature checks, for example. But at the same time, common sense kind of tells you that 100,000 from all over the world, and particularly from areas that we know have been heavily affected by the virus, is not a negligible number. And really, in the bigger scheme of things, where they've managed to do so much, they managed to effectively create a hospital in the space of 10 days. They've managed to, if Matt Hancock is, his figures are all to be taken at face value, they've managed to massively provide for testing from a standing start right up to the target figure and more. So it doesn't seem to be beyond the wit of the government to set up temperature controls and other checks at airports, and perhaps ask people to sign some kind of form saying whether they've been, where they've been, and what contact they've been in. And I find it utterly bewildering that they are still not doing that, and are only belatedly saying, well, maybe in June we'll introduce this quarantine regime, and it's all a bit wishy-washy and seriously after the horse has bolted. In terms of a rapid lockdown, it's really easy to be wise after the event. I think there is a sort of received wisdom now, certainly amongst the commentariat, that the government should have locked down harder and faster. I have to say that if they had done that, I'd probably been one of the people complaining, saying that it was all an overreaction. So I don't want to be personally wise after the event. I'm not a scientist. I don't know what they were being advised at the time. But what we can say is that whatever strategy was adopted, as you point out, we have ended up with one of the worst death tolls in the world. So clearly, more than one thing did not go right. And in due course, there's going to be, without a doubt, some form of public inquiry, and no doubt at that point we will find out what difference it might have made if we'd locked down earlier.
As from this week and last Wednesday, many businesses have returned to work, with a lot of people using public transport of coronavirus. In your opinion, is it inevitable that a second spike of coronavirus deaths is going to happen in the next few weeks?
Well, that really depends on the extent to which people really do go back to work. I mean, I haven't been on a tube now for weeks, and I'd be very loath. I mean, I was previously someone that was on and off the tube the whole time. Personally, I would be very loath to get on a tube at the moment if there was any viable alternative, and I mean including walking or, just taking the car, when previously I wouldn't have dreamt of driving into central London. So I wonder whether the numbers really will pick up to the extent that people fear. At the same time, I do recognise that for many people in central London or living out of London, there isn't actually that much of a viable alternative to get into their place of work. And I've always thought that this was a sort of slightly, illogical thing about a lockdown, in that as long as the virus is still out there at all, the minute you ease a lockdown, it's obvious that the numbers are going to go up again. So yes, I mean, in answer to your question, it seems certain that it'll go up, but what constitutes a spike that we can't manage, and what constitutes a rise that we now have the systems in place to deal with, those are two very different things.
Mm-hmm. Earlier, we touched upon care homes. The government's official advice in February and March was that visits were still allowed into care homes.
I think the issue with care homes goes to the heart of the extent to which care homes are sort of forgotten elements of our health and social care system. It is extraordinary, all these years on, after so many attempts to come up with plans to try to integrate health and social care better, that the system remains very, very bitty, really, and communication between, for example, hospitals and care homes is absolutely woeful. There are, of course, good examples and an awful lot of examples where people just fall through the cracks. And I think one of the most shocking things about this crisis has been the way in which patients have been discharged from hospitals into care homes, and those patients are known to have coronavirus, and they have been allowed into care homes where naturally the virus has spread. And that is, it's just beggars belief, really. But it does go to this whole thing about, a lack of joined up thinking and policy making around the NHS and social care providers.
Is it necessary to have like a national social care system? Is that something that you think the government is going to propose in years to come?
I mean, this is so overdue. It is so overdue. And, we need a system where, there are far fewer barriers between hospital care and care in different settings. So at the moment, you've got a ludicrous situation where, in the normal scheme of things, not corona times, people are discharged from hospitals into care homes, and care homes can't get hold of their medical records, for example, and that just makes it a nightmare for any kind of continuity of medical care or attention. So look, I think this is 10 years overdue and more. It could go either way. It could be that this crisis really crystallizes the urgency and the determination that will be needed to sort this out once and for all. And it's not as if we don't know what needs to be done. The political issue is, how the hell do you pay for it? So it could be that this is the impetus finally that is needed for a breakthrough, and we get some kind of cross-party consensus on how this is going to be paid for. Or my fear would be it actually goes in the other direction, and there is so little money and there is so many other wars to fight as we come out of this crisis that once again social care falls by the wayside. And if I had to put money on it, I would go for the second bleaker scenario.
And the government has announced that it wants schools to reopen by the 1st of June, primary schools. And Michael Gove has said that there's going to be a little risk for students. How can teachers safely implement social distancing at schools?
Well, bottom line is that they can't. And I personally think it's just silly to imagine that you can keep small children apart. And I think it's wrong to try to do so. I don't know whether you saw that really heartbreaking picture of little children in a playground in, I think it was in France, where they were all being made to sit in a chalked out square in the playground and couldn't be with each other. I mean, look, that is unsustainable. You know, imagine the regimenting, the army-like mentality that will be needed to enforce that for young children. Imagine how traumatic that is. I wouldn't want my children going back to school under those circumstances. I'm not worried about them getting coronavirus or transmitting coronavirus, but I don't want them to be held back from being around their friends in the way that normal human interaction should be. So look, the reality is that we cannot eliminate risk to teachers in schools. That's just not possible. And, you know, there comes a point, and I think that point is now, where we have to have a discussion about what is an acceptable level of risk for adults to be taking on behalf of children who desperately need to get back to school. It's all right for kids in nice houses like I have, who've got, you know, the facilities and the support for homeschooling, who've got a nice garden and live in a nice part of the countryside and so on. It's not okay for children from deprived families, very dysfunctional households, where they are just sort of being left to their own devices, you know. And I think that the attainment gap is going to open up further. I think there's an awful lot of suffering behind closed doors in these chaotic households, and the sooner we can get kids back to school, the better. That is not to say that teachers should just be expected to, you know, go out there without any support and without some measures, what measures that we can realistically put in place to limit the spread of the virus. But we're not going to be able to guarantee that teachers can't, not going to be exposed at all, because that is the setting that they work in. It's a bit like trying to guarantee that health workers aren't going to be exposed to it. Unfortunately, it's impossible to eliminate that risk. And by the way, I've been quite punchy on this, and I've been criticised for pontificating from my sitting room about what teachers shouldn't do. I have volunteered to help at my local school. I will work in any capacity. I'm happy to be a cleaner. I'm happy to marshal in the playground. I will do anything if my services can be of use, because I think it's important to show that we're not afraid and that the children come first.
The crisis has also hit billionaires quite hard, with Richard Branson asking the government for a £500 million bailout. Is this something that the government should bail out billionaires?
Well, the Sunday Times Rich List came out yesterday, and I saw that Richard Branson is still worth at least $3 billion. And it is hard, isn't it, to be too sympathetic to figures like Richard Branson, who are appealing for bailouts. But in a way, you've kind of got to separate the individual and their personal wealth from the companies that they're running and the employment that they are providing. And, we probably go down the wrong route if we personalize everything, because ultimately virtually every business, every really big business is owned or controlled by someone at the top who's made a great deal of money. So, it shouldn't be really about whether we have sympathy for that person at the top, but whether we think that the company is worth or deserves propping up, or is it legitimate or wise? Is that a good use of taxpayers' money, because there are, in some cases, thousands of jobs depending on it? So I don't really have a strong personal view on this. I think people like Richard Branson have to be careful how they approach any appeals for government bailouts, and make it clear that they too are making some sacrifices, not just asking for taxpayers' money. And I think he has tried to do that to some extent.
It's necessary. Like, why are people spreading rumours about the 5G and coronavirus still?
Well, I think those questions, the 5G and coronavirus, they're not entirely unlinked, in that I think we all accept there's no question mark over where this virus originated. It originated in China, and there have been some serious questions over the Chinese regime's handling of it, their openness, their honesty. Are any of the official figures that they've put out trustworthy about the number of cases they've had, and indeed where exactly the virus originated? Did it come from a wet market, which, by the way, is horrific enough? Frankly, it's more than overdue that the international community started trying to exert whatever pressure it could to end some of the horrific practices in some of these live animal markets in China. I've seen them for myself. They are absolutely awful. There is no need for anybody to be eating bats and other crazy things like that. Or did it originate in some kind of laboratory, in which case I really think that we need to know that. So there is very little confidence, I think, amongst most voters that the Chinese have dealt straight on this virus. I mean, their regime ultimately is responsible for either practices or ways of life that have ultimately caused absolute devastation across the world. And under those circumstances, should we be welcoming the Chinese regime and their state-supported companies to have control of parts of our key infrastructure? Personally, I don't think so. And I think a lot of people are very, very queasy about that. In terms of the demonstrations in Hyde Park against the lockdown, I actually happened to cycle through Hyde Park on Saturday when those were taking place. And I mean, the pictures that people may have seen may have made these demonstrations look enormous. They actually weren't. There were a bit of a kind of pockets of people in different parts of the park, and it wasn't a huge turnout. But I do understand why people get frustrated, particularly younger people whose risk of catching the disease in a way that really is very dangerous for them is, as far as the initial statistics suggest, pretty low.
Mm-hmm. And Keir Starmer, this weekend, it was also revealed that he had a plot of land worth maybe even £10 million.
Farmer Starmer, as he shall now be known.
Is he still a man of the people after this?
Honestly, I don't care how much land he has. I didn't engage with the story. I thought I saw something about him, having some estate or whatever. I mean, who cares? Who cares? Labour did at its best in recent political history when it was happy about being aspirational, when Tony Blair and the people around him were supremely relaxed. I think it was Peter Mandelson who said he was supremely relaxed at the idea of people being filthy rich. And, I think that the Corbyn experiment has demonstrated that the whole kind of, redistribution of wealth, race to the bottom, is not a vote winner. So I have no problem at all with Keir Starmer being as rich as he likes, and whatever his land or whatever, I really don't give a stuff. And I hope there are more people around him who are similarly aspirational and happy to, have good things as a result of their hard endeavours.
Thank you, Isabel, so much for your time. I really appreciate it.